So, gamesindustry.biz, they put out this article courtesy of Jeffrey Bunting, and is kind of in response, or it has to do with an article that came out a week or two ago, which I read through. Didn't talk about it on the podcast because I don't know. I think my fucking voice got tired, was what happened. I kind of wanted to see how it would develop, and it was also a big downer in a week that had a little bit of downer news. It was essentially about the culture of crunch in the Japanese games industry, and how honestly, just Japanese industry in general, not specific to games, but there is a culture of overwork and expected overtime. This was an interesting detail from that article. Apparently, that I recall that apparently in Japan, it's common practice for overtime pay to be included in your salary. So basically, forced overtime is illegal, which it should be. Forced overtime is illegal under Japanese labor laws. So what they'll do is they'll basically take your base salary, and then as part of your salary, they will add overtime to it. And because of Japanese working culture, if you don't do overtime then, you're kind of seen as stealing from the company because they're paying you for work that you're not doing, which is really dumb and predatory and shitty. There's a lot of problems with Japanese corporate culture. My Japanese tutor, her husband works at a pretty big Japanese company. I mean, I won't say which one, obviously, but he works for a pretty big Japanese company, and she sometimes will tell me about, we just make some conversation during our lessons, and she'll talk about, what it's like, and some of the things that surprised me about Japanese corporate culture. One of the things she told me was like, so he's been in the business for fucking decades at what he does. He's been all over the world. They travel all over the world. They've moved a bunch of times. And he's approaching his 50s. Or I think he's in his 50s or his late 50s. Like 55. She basically told me that they have this policy. I don't know if this is like a law or something, or like a labor laws thing, or if it's just corporate policies. But apparently it's a common policy that once someone reaches a certain age, I think she said starting at 55, your salary actually goes down. It starts depreciating. Because I think the goal, I had this conversation forever ago with her, but the goal was, the idea is that because they have an aging population, they're trying to cycle people out of they're trying to cycle older people out of the company and younger people in. So they need to, because a lot of positions at corporate jobs are like lifelong practically. Like there's people who get their first job out of college and they keep that until they retire, which is like unheard of in a lot of like Western countries, at least. At least for like a corporate job. Obviously, start your own business might be different, but for like just an office job, it's pretty uncommon. It tends to be a lot more, bouncing between businesses every, say, even if you spend like 8 years at a company, it's considered kind of long in like America at least. So they have this whole thing where like his pay is like going down, which is kind of crazy because he's actually like a pretty high level position in this company, like C-suite. And he has all this experience. He's been with the company for decades. He's been all over the world. He has skills and experiences that he's a valuable asset, you might say. They have a daughter who's in her 20s somewhere abouts. I'm not sure exactly how old. But they have a daughter who's in her 20s, lives in the U.S., kind of grew up in the U.S. They grew up when they were living here. and she is working at Twitch as like an engineer. And my tutor, she tells me, she goes, yeah, like our daughter makes more money than my husband. And she's like a 20-something engineer at Twitch. And you would expect, like, yeah, if you're working at Twitch, you'd probably be making decent money. But, like, more money at, like, that position with that level of experience than, a guy like him, it's, like, fucking crazy. And, hey, it might be that Twitch overpays its engineers. I don't know. But, like, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of issues with corporate culture that are just weird in Japan. Not to mention just, like, expected crunch, which is part of this. Let's go back to what I was talking about. The culture of they're gonna pay you, they're gonna wrap this whole practice is so like devious. Wrapping your overtime into the pay you would get for overtime into or like a certain level of overtime, I imagine. So overtime could be infinite. Into your regular pay is very devious to make you feel guilty for leaving. So one of the companies they pointed out was FromSoft. Oh, hey, and if you want to talk about crunch, you know what Japanese dev does not crunch at all? The Final Fantasy XIV team. Yoshi P has gone on record in saying that they actually, even Yoshi P crunched the shit out of himself during the development of A Realm Reborn. Like, I think he literally said it took the man. He's like when I say he's like the hyper manager, I fucking mean it. He's the ultimate manager and apparently a great boss, because he said he took years off of his life to manage that project. He was the hardest working one. And he would specifically not let his the devs do overtime on the team, because he was like, I have the schedule. If we stick to the schedule and we get everything done on time that we need to get done on time, we're gonna make it through. I need you to go sleep. They were so excited and enthusiastic. They wanted to go do a bunch of overtime. And he was like, no, go home, spend some time with your family, get some good sleep, be back in the morning. And apparently the team they really don't have to crunch on anything, and they turn shit out like clockwork, and it's extremely high quality, and they all get maximum bonuses. So I always feel good. You always feel good playing that game. Anyway, so there was this article from Games Industry Biz. It said, how much does From Software crunch? So current and former staff at the Elden Ring developer respond to claims of excessive overtime and low pay. So this was as they say, following the success of Elden Ring, a series of negative reviews of From Software surfaced on Twitter, claiming that staff at the studio often faced excessive overtime and a chronic dissatisfaction with pay. So they have a website. It's called Career Connection. These were reviews. It's kind of like Glassdoor, like posting reviews of places you've been employed. These were left between 2012 and 2019. And this was kind of a topic of discussion. So GamesIns.biz talked to some employees. They keep them anonymous, but there's some interesting quotes here. So they say, one source was quick to refute the stereotypes of Japanese companies overworking their staff. He said, quote, the general industry in Japan is not that crazy compared to my experience in other fields. Japan has a lot of holidays, and there is a rule that From Software staff shouldn't stay later than 10 p.m., and 90% of the time staff won't stay later than 9 p.m. So they bring up in this article the Japan's, they just call it the Labor Act. It's not the Japan, it's just the Labor Act. Says that they have an 8-hour workday. That's 8-hour workday with quote unquote flexible work hours. And the core time is between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. That stuff is always fun. The 8-hour workday thing is funny to me because I'm pretty sure it's pretty solid evidence now that the most amount of time you can dedicate to something with like focused work is about 5 hours, and then after that your brain just starts dropping off. I totally feel that in my work. I can sit down for like 5 hours with maybe like a little break in the middle, and then let's say 5.5, 6 hours, and then I just hit that point where I'm like, yeah, I can't do anything else. I'm pretty much done. But we have the 8-hour work week for some reason. Multiple sources can see that there is some level of crunching, and that's a direct quote, at FromSoft. So there's a couple things where people say, like, it seems to be, as this article points out, it seems to vary by department. Some people say there's not a lot of overtime. Some people say, oh, well, during critical periods, I have to do a lot of crunch. Someone says, it's not as if crunch happens on a daily basis. It's more common that during the ROM check for the publisher, 2 or 3 months before release. So, ROM check. What is a ROM check? Are they just talking? Sure. ROM check. Pretty sure ROM check, what they're referring to is just. That might be like a Japan specific term. I assume when I read this that was like the final like polish phase, I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, so they do back up the claim that overtime is usually included in the salary. Some other quotes from here. They say FromSoft is not a big organization, so that the pay might not be as high. You can kind of not subtract, extract. Is that the word I'm thinking of from that? Compared to the cost of living in Tokyo, one source said FromSoft's salary is not adequate. Those are their words. Salary is not adequate. They went on to say that others close to them at the studio did not appear satisfied with their salaries either. So Salary Explorer is a website company, I guess. It reports the monthly average salary in Japanese game development. As they report. Sorry, I'm trying to reread this, and it's incorporated into my regular speech. The average salary in Japanese game dev, it ranges from 231,000 yen, which is about $1,600 US dollars, to 735,000 yen, or 5,300 USD. So from around 1.6K to 5.3K US dollars. By comparison, recent roles at FromSoftware all start from about 1.5K a month. So that's lower than the average. The monthly rent in Tokyo ranges from about, I'm just going to go off the US dollar numbers. The monthly rent in Tokyo is about 1.4K for a single bed apartment, while the cost of living hovers at around 1,000. So pretty tight. You're getting like about $100 over your rent. Not super great. You have to. That's just rent, right? You have to imagine furniture, food, car payments. Although you're probably taking the public transit. Is public transit free in Japan? I actually don't know that. Is public transit free in Japan? Nope. Yep. So, yeah. Oh, apparently, according to this article, also expensive rail transport. Okay, cool. Great. So yeah, there's a lot of other things that factor on top of that. Now, hopefully, you're not starting at, you can maybe negotiate up from 1.5K, because that's a little tricky. But like, yeah, you might be living cheap working for FromSoft. With the immediate success of Elden Ring, publisher Bandai Namco announced in February that it would be raising salaries by an average of $362 per month for all employees. Moreover, base salaries would increase from the previous $1.6K to $2.1K. So it looks like... and that does not seem to have affected... So they cite in this article that the FromSoft actual, like their open positions are, still lists at that old like 1.6K starting rate. Sorry, 1.5K starting rate. So they don't seem to have followed the raise that Bandai is giving to their employees. However, there is a bit at the end where it mentions, it's kind of like the retort. However, although there is talk of crunch and low salaries, there also appears to be a lot of employee satisfaction at FromSoft. Multiple sources gave positive accounts of their experience at From Software, despite their own criticism. Oh my god, this quote is so funny. One suggested the long hours are a bit like playing Dark Souls. Quote, it's kind of tense in a way. It's the Dark Souls of jobs. It's kind of tense in a way. There's a lot of struggle to get things right, but if you get over the hump, it is very satisfying. It's just like you defeated a boss in Dark Souls. Excuse me. Others were more pointed in their praise. It's been a great experience, one said. Not only because you can work on a AAA title, but also because you can work with coworkers that are so talented and passionate about creating a video game. Now, I take all this with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's a couple ways that you could read this. So you could say, hey, FromSoft is kind of like a mid-tier developer, right? Elden Ring's kind of their first real AAA game. They've kind of been like venturing into that with like Sekiro and Dark Souls 3, but Elden Ring is like the biggest thing they've ever done. And it's kind of like a new sort of dimension for them that they've sort of stepped into. And you could say that like this is just the reality of working for a small developer, is that you're not going to get paid very much. And the games are not going to make a whole lot of money. Actually, I don't know if that's true. Those games probably made a lot of money. But the budget is... games are also expensive to make. And I don't know. Yeah. I'm trying to organize my thoughts about this. You could read it as it's the reality of working for a small developer, that wages are not going to be, or salaries are not going to be particularly high. You could also maybe read this as a bit of, there is a known phenomena of exploitation in the games industry, of exploiting people's passion for the medium to basically give them shitty work with hours that are too long and to force them to crunch on things. And it definitely has a way of grinding people up and spitting them out. So even the positive comments, you could sort of, I don't know. From what I understand, also you have to remember that these are like Japanese people who are talking. So they might have a totally different perspective on what they find acceptable. Sort of like if you grow up in like a household with a lot of neglect, and then like you get out of there and you're like, wait, what? That's not normal? This isn't a normal thing. It's, it's not normal for me to be forced to sleep in the front lawn kind of thing. I don't think that this article is necessarily like a huge rebuttal of that initial article about crunch in Japanese game dev, nor do I really think it was intended to be one. It's just, what are some other perspectives on this from the inside of people, who live it? And you would have to also mind you that I and the people writing this article are mostly are Americans, basically. And we have a certain view of work. And crunch has now become a much more well-known topic in the West. So people they care more than they did, let's say, 10 years ago about it. So it might hit a different way for us. If crunch was a big topic of discussion and how, like, no, you shouldn't be overworked for your job. In Japan, if that was a discussion in Japan, maybe it would be different. Maybe the perspective would be different. Maybe the whole discussion would be shifted. This is just like one piece of a much larger story, and I think that there's generally like not the Japanese games industry is a little more tight-lipped, and they don't really talk as much about the internals of like what the working environment is like compared to a lot of Western studios. So we have a lot of information about how a lot of Western studios function. We don't have that, at least not in English. Maybe there's like a Japanese Jason Schreier, who does like reporting on industry working conditions and stuff like that. And we just don't know. But if there is, I have not heard of them, and no other news outlets have reported on their findings very much. So this whole thing, I would take it with a grain of salt. Not to say that anyone here is lying. I'm just saying that like perspectives could be different. We don't have a full picture. And this is also just one developer. I'd like to hear what this is like across the industry. Really what I'd like is just more information. I'd like more reporting and more transparency about what working conditions are like in this industry. It's kind of it. I guess that's my final statement. I like more transparency.